There are moments when reality bends. Moments when the line between what's real and what's imagined blurs until you can't tell the difference anymore. I never believed in those moments until I found the records. When I first stepped into the abandoned halls of Blackwood Psychiatric Institute, I thought I was just doing my job. Another documentary, another forgotten building with a dark history. But what I found there, what I'm still finding every time I close my eyes, wasn't just history. It was waiting for me, for us, for anyone who reads those patient files. And now I can't stop seeing it. Welcome to the Obscura Lore Vault. My name is Dr. Morgan Hayes, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes madness isn't just in the mind. Sometimes it's something that finds you. Introduction. Before I tell you what I found in those patient records, I need you to understand something. I'm a rational person, a psychologist specializing in collective delusions and mass hysteria. I've spent my career explaining away the unexplainable, turning the supernatural into the psychological. I was preparing a documentary series on the history of psychiatric treatment in America. Blackwood Institute wasn't even supposed to be my main focus, just one segment of many. The facility had been closed for just under 4 years. Not ancient history, not some Victorian-era asylum with primitive treatments and ghost stories going back centuries. This was a modern psychiatric hospital, shut down in 2021 after budget cuts and a series of patient deaths that the administration called unfortunate coincidences. My producer had secured rare permission to film inside. The building was scheduled for demolition in 3 months. We were supposed to document what remained before it was erased forever. What we didn't know, what nobody told us, was that most of the patient records had never been transferred when the facility closed. They were just left behind. Hundreds of files, locked in a basement records room that someone had forgotten to empty, or perhaps deliberately left behind. First discovery. The records room was behind a heavy metal door in the basement level. The maintenance worker who let us in seemed nervous, kept checking his watch, wanting to leave. "Just don't stay after dark," he warned. "Building's not stable." But I could tell from the way his eyes wouldn't meet mine that he was hiding something. "Has anyone been through these records since the closure?" I asked him. He paused at the door. "The first team they sent to clear this room, 3 of them quit the next day. 4th one's still on medical leave. Stress, they said." My camera operator, Jesse, was setting up lights while I began examining the files. The organization system was meticulous. Patient names, admission dates, diagnoses, all carefully labeled and stored chronologically. But there was a separate section, labeled only with a red stripe across the folder tabs. No patient names, just numbers. And they were all from the same 6-month period in 2020, right before the hospital began its shutdown process. The first file I opened contained the intake form for patient 0472. A 34-year-old woman admitted after what appeared to be a nervous breakdown. She'd been found wandering downtown, disoriented, talking about the dark between the walls and eyes that watch from behind the mirror. Standard psychotic break language, nothing unusual, except for the attending psychiatrist's notes, dated 3 weeks after admission.
Patient continues to describe the same hallucination with disturbing consistency. Claims to see a figure with elongated limbs that folds itself into impossible angles. Most concerning is the precision of detail, the exact same descriptions, day after day, down to specific measurements and movement patterns. This level of consistency is highly unusual in hallucinatory states.
I flipped through more pages, finding the same note repeated weeks later. Multiple patients on Ward C now reporting identical hallucination. No contact between reporting patients confirmed. Implementing isolation protocols, to prevent contamination. The final note was dated just 2 days before that doctor's employment at Blackwood was terminated. I saw it last night, in my office. The dimensions were exactly as the patients described. This is no mass hallucination. Something is happening in this ward. Growing unease. "Find anything interesting?" Jessie asked, setting up the camera for our first shots of the records room. I hesitated. Something about those files made me reluctant to share them immediately. "Just standard cases," I lied. "Let's get the establishing shots first." That night at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I'd taken photos of the red-striped files on my phone, and I found myself scrolling through them at 3 a.m. looking for connections. 27 patients had reported the same hallucination over a 3-month period. Patients with different diagnoses, different backgrounds, different medications. The only thing they had in common was their placement in Ward C. And what they all saw, this impossibly thin figure that could bend and fold itself, watching from corners, from behind reflective surfaces, was described with such identical precision that it defied psychological explanation. That's when I noticed something in the corner of one patient's drawing, a crude sketch of the hallucination. In the bottom right corner, almost too small to see, were 4 words: "It spreads through knowledge." I put down my phone, suddenly aware of the darkness in the corners of my hotel room. The slight shimmer of the TV screen, turned off but still faintly reflective. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something move in that dim reflection. A trick of tired eyes, nothing more. But I slept with the bathroom light on that night. Returned to Blackwood. The next day, we returned to Blackwood. Jesse seemed distracted, kept rubbing his eyes. "Bad night?" I asked as we set up. "Weird dreams," he muttered. "Something about folding paper into impossible shapes." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's broken heating system. We split up that day, Jesse filming the abandoned patient rooms while I returned to the records. The red-striped files drew me back like a magnet. This time, I found session transcripts, recordings of doctors interviewing the affected patients. One exchange stood out. "Can you describe what you see when this figure appears?" "It doesn't want me to. It knows when we talk about it." "How could it know?" "Because now you're thinking about it too. And thinking about it is how it finds you." I sat back, an uncomfortable feeling settling in my stomach. Because I was thinking about it, had been all night. This thin, folding thing that hid in corners and reflections. That's when I noticed the final folder, thicker than the others, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. The label read simply, "Ward C, Final Report, Classified." My hands shook slightly as I broke the seal. The Ward C incident. The report began clinically enough, a detailed account of the shared hallucination phenomenon that had affected 27 patients and eventually 5 staff members. But, as I read further, the tone changed, became more desperate, The hospital had brought in specialists, neurologists, sleep experts, even a parapsychologist, though that was kept off the official records. They'd moved the affected patients to isolation rooms, removed all reflective surfaces, kept them separated. Nothing worked. More patients began seeing it, then more staff. The report included brain scans showing identical patterns of activity in affected individuals. Impossible patterns, parts of the brain lighting up that shouldn't be able to communicate with each other. And then I found the photographs. Black and white security camera stills, grainy and indistinct. Empty hallways, patient rooms, offices, except they weren't empty. In each photo, if you looked carefully at the darkest corner, there was something. A distortion, a too tall, too thin shape that didn't quite make sense to the eye. In one image, it appeared to be folding itself between a filing cabinet and the wall, a space too narrow for anything human-sized. I dropped the file, papers scattering across the floor, because I'd seen movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow sliding across the wall where no shadow should be. But when I turned, there was nothing there. Just the empty records room with its flickering fluorescent light. My phone buzzed with a text from Jesse. "Come to Ward C. You need to see this." Ward C. I hurried through the abandoned corridors, the final report clutched in my hand. The building seemed different now, darker, the shadows deeper, the air thicker. Ward C was on the 3rd floor. The elevator hadn't worked since the closure, so I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. With each floor I climbed, I felt more exposed, more watched. The feeling of eyes on my back grew so intense that twice I spun around, certain I'd catch someone, something following me. The door to Ward C was ajar when I arrived. Unlike the other wards we'd filmed, this one hadn't been cleaned out. Beds still stood in the rooms, some with restraints hanging loose. Privacy curtains swayed gently in air currents I couldn't feel. "Jesse?" I called, my voice sounding muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. No answer. I moved deeper into the ward, checking rooms as I passed. Empty. All empty. Until I reached the last room on the left, room 337. The door was closed, unlike the others. A piece of paper had been taped to it, recent, not aged like everything else here. It was a printout of one of the photos I'd just been looking at in the records room. The grainy security camera image with the distorted figure in the corner. Someone had circled the figure and written beneath it, "I see it too now." The handwriting was Jesse's. I pushed the door open, heart pounding. Jesse sat on the stripped mattress of the hospital bed, back to me, camera pointed at the corner of the room. "Jesse? What are you doing?" He didn't turn around. "I've been filming it for 20 minutes. It doesn't move when you watch it directly." I stepped closer. "There's nothing there, Jesse. Look at the viewfinder screen, not the corner itself." I moved beside him, careful not to block the camera, and looked at the small digital screen. And there it was. In the corner of the room, visible only on the digital display, stood a figure so tall, its head bent against the ceiling. Impossibly thin limbs. Body twisted in a way that human anatomy wouldn't allow. Its face, if you could call it that, was smooth, except for indentations where eyes should be. It was exactly as described in the patient files. "How?" I whispered. "It can't manifest fully in our direct perception," Jesse said, voice eerily calm. "But technology sees it better than we do. The patients who saw it directly were the ones whose minds were already flexible. Different brain chemistry." "How do you know that?" I asked, unable to look away from the screen. "It told me. Last night. In my dreams." I backed away. "We need to leave. Now." Jesse finally turned to look at me, and I saw that his pupils were dilated, almost swallowing the iris. "It's too late," he said. "Once you know about it, once you can conceptualize it, it can find you. And now you've read the files." The truth in the final pages. I ran, left Jesse there with his camera and that thing in the corner. I should have tried to help him, to drag him out, but primal fear overrode everything else. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, the file folder still clutched in my other hand. I drove straight back to the hotel, packed my bags, and checked out. Told the documentary team there had been a family emergency. I was on the highway by nightfall, putting as many miles between myself and Blackwood as possible, It wasn't until I reached a motel 300 miles away that I realized I still had the classified Ward C report. Sitting on the sagging motel bed away from Blackwood, I felt safer. Rational thought returned. I'd let myself get caught up in a shared delusion. Nothing more. Jesse had been affected by my own growing paranoia, by the power of suggestion after I'd told him about the files. There was no folding creature watching from corners and reflections, so I made myself read the final pages of the report to prove to myself that there would be a rational explanation. The final entry was dated 1 week before the hospital announced its closure. New clinical voice, exhausted, frightened. Containment has failed. 43 patients and 11 staff now affected. Isolation is ineffective. The phenomenon spreads without direct contact. We've confirmed transmission occurs through knowledge acquisition. Simply learning about the entity in detail appears sufficient for it to establish awareness of a new host. Brain scans of affected individuals show consistent changes in the occipital and temporal lobes. These changes allow direct perception of the entity, which exists in dimensional space adjacent to our own. Most alarmingly, we've confirmed the entity feeds on specific neural activity. The brain's attempt to process its impossible geometry generates energy it harvests. In essence, thinking about it strengthens it. Recommendation: immediate closure of Ward C, all records sealed. Affected patients to be transferred to specialized facilities under cover story of hospital restructuring. Memory suppression therapy to be implemented where possible. Final note: I've begun seeing movement in my peripheral vision, darkness gathering in corners. I've submitted my resignation effective immediately and will be checking myself into treatment at the Ravenwood facility under an assumed name. God help anyone who reads these records in full. If you're reading this and haven't yet seen it, stop thinking about what I've described. Forget the tall, thin figure. Forget how it folds. Forget the empty eye hollows. Forget it now, while you still can. I threw the report across the room, but it was too late. The description was burning in my mind. The tall, thin figure, the folding, the empty eyes. And now there was a shape in the bathroom doorway of my motel room, not fully visible, just a distortion in the air, a wrongness in the dimensions of the space. I closed my eyes, tried to clear my mind, to stop thinking about it. But that only made the image stronger in my mind's eye. When I opened my eyes again, the bathroom mirror reflected something standing behind me that wasn't there when I turned around. Desperate measures. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I drove further, changing motels every night, but it made no difference. It was in every corner now, every reflection, just at the edge of perception. I tried to research what was happening. Bad idea. Everything I learned only gave it more form, more presence. The internet had scattered references to similar phenomena. Patients in psychiatric facilities across the country reporting identical hallucinations. Forum threads about the folding man that had been mysteriously deleted. I found one account from a former Blackwood nurse who'd quit after the Ward C incident.
It feeds on attention. The more you notice it, the stronger it gets. The more you try to understand it, the closer it comes. The only defense is to fill your mind with something else. Something so consuming that there's no room for it to take hold.
On the 5th day, Jesse called me. "Where are you?" His voice sounded hollow, distant. "Far away," I said. "You need to leave Blackwood, Jesse." "I never left," he replied, "and neither did you." "Not really. It doesn't work that way." "What are you talking about? I'm hundreds of miles away." "Distance doesn't matter to it. Space is different for it. Flexible." "How do we stop it?" I asked. desperation breaking through. A long silence. Then, the patients who recovered, there were a few, they found something else to fixate on, something personal, emotional, more powerful than fear. Like what? For one, it was his daughter's face. He'd focus on remembering every detail for hours. Another used music. Complex pieces she'd play mentally from memory. The entity couldn't compete with that level of focused attention. And you? What are you focusing on? Another long pause. I'm not fighting it anymore, he said finally. It's easier this way. When you stop struggling, it's almost beautiful how it moves, how it folds time around itself. The Patient Zero Discovery. I tried Jesse's suggestion, focused on memories of my father teaching me to fish, the exact sensation of sunlight on water, the precise shade of blue in my mother's favorite dress. It helped. The presence receded just a little, but I needed more. I needed to understand where this had started, how the entity had first found its way to Blackwood. I still had all the files. Somewhere in them had to be Patient Zero, the first person to see the folding creature. I forced myself to review everything methodically, even as I felt it watching me from the corners of the room. And then I found it. Not in the files themselves, but in a newspaper clipping tucked into the back of the classified report. A small article about an industrial accident at a physics research facility 10 miles from Blackwood. 3 researchers hospitalized after an equipment malfunction during an experiment involving spatial geometry and dimensional folding. The date was exactly 1 week before the first patient at Blackwood reported seeing the entity. The article named the researchers. One of them, Dr. Eleanor Wright, had been admitted to Blackwood after exhibiting extreme paranoid delusions. She was patient 0472, the first file I'd opened. I searched the files frantically for more information about her, found her initial interview transcripts. Can you tell me what happened during the experiment, Dr. Wright?
We were attempting to visualize higher dimensional space, to create a mathematical model that would allow us to perceive beyond our limited 3 dimensions. The equations worked too well. The visualization device showed us something that was watching us from the higher dimensions. Something that had always been there, just outside our perception.
And you believe this entity followed you out of the laboratory?
You don't understand. It's always been here, all around us. We just couldn't see it before. The experiment didn't create a connection. It removed a filter. And now I can't put the filter back.
I found her final note, written 3 months after admission, the day before she disappeared from her locked room at Blackwood.
I understand it now. It's not malevolent. It's curious. Our minds were never meant to perceive it, so the perception itself damages us. It feeds not on fear, but on recognition. It's been patient, waiting countless millennia for beings on this plane to evolve enough to perceive it. I've learned to control when and how I see it now. The medication helps create distance. With practice, you can choose to see it or not. Tomorrow, I'm going to attempt communication on its terms. I've worked out the mathematical principles. If I'm right, I can fold myself temporarily into its dimensional space. If I'm wrong, well, no one will find my body in any configuration recognizable as human.
The solution. Eleanor Wright had never been found. According to an addendum, they'd reviewed security footage from that night. It showed her sitting on her bed, staring intently at the corner of her room for hours. Then she simply folded. Her body bent at impossible angles, collapsed in on itself and vanished. The footage had been confiscated by unidentified government officials the next day. Blackwood began its shutdown procedures a week later. I sat in my motel room, The presence now so strong I could almost see it directly. A tall, thin distortion standing by the window. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. With practice, you can choose to see it or not. I'd been running from it, trying not to think about it, which only made my mind circle back to it constantly. What if the solution wasn't to flee, but to confront, not to communicate as Eleanor had tried, but to acknowledge and then dismiss? I turned directly toward where I sensed the entity standing. I see you, I said aloud. I acknowledge you exist in your dimension, watching ours, but you have no power in this world except what our perception gives you. I'm choosing what fills my mind now, not you. I began reciting poetry I'd memorized as a child, then song lyrics, mathematical formulas, anything that required complete focus. And slowly the presence began to recede. Not disappear. I don't think it can ever completely disappear once you know about it, but diminish, become manageable. That was 3 weeks ago. I've learned to live with the knowledge now, to control when I allow myself to think about it. The entity is still there in corners and reflections, but more like a shadow than a presence. As long as I don't focus on it, it can't grow stronger. I never returned to Blackwood, never finished the documentary. Some history should remain buried. Jesse, I haven't heard from him since that phone call. His family filed a missing persons report. The police found his camera in room 337, but the footage had been corrupted. Nothing but static. I dream about him sometimes. In the dreams, he's trying to tell me something important about the space between dimensions, about how time moves differently there, about how he's learning to fold. I always wake up before he finishes. Epilogue. I thought I was getting better at controlling it, at keeping the entity at bay through focus and distraction, until yesterday, when I noticed something that froze my blood. I was editing some notes, a completely unrelated project, reviewing video footage from before Blackwood, before I knew anything about the folding entity. And there it was, in the background of a family gathering, in the corner of my parents' living room, a tall, thin distortion that no one was looking at. It had always been there, in my life, in all our lives, just waiting for us to notice it. And now I have another realization, a terrible one. By telling you this story, I've passed it to you too. Given you the knowledge, the mental image, the awareness it needs to find you. I'm sorry, I truly am. But I had to share it, had to distribute the burden of awareness. The more of us who know, the less it can focus on any single mind. Look for it now, in the corner of your room, in the reflection behind you. That strange movement you catch from the corner of your eye. It's watching you, has been all along. But remember what I told you. You control your focus. Fill your mind with something else, something personal, powerful, consuming. Don't let it take hold. Don't look too long at the shadows. And whatever you do, don't try to see its face. If you found this story disturbing, please hit subscribe to the Obscuralore Vault for more terrifying tales from the edge of reality. Like and share if you dare expose others to the knowledge you now carry. And remember, some things once seen can never be unseen.